Ben Domenech joins me to talk about this crowded field. Ben, of course, is the editor at large of The Spectator and a Fox News contributor. Good Friday to you, Ben. How are you?
I'm doing well, Hugh. And look, I was a little surprised by that news regarding Rick Scott. I've reached out to a couple of people who were in his circle. One thing that I would say that is a little interesting is that was reported obviously by Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan in the New York Times. They don't they are not typically the route for Rick Scott to tease anything. And so that just as an indication to me of how serious this is, I think that there are definitely people who want to have that story out there, indicating that Ron DeSantis has sort of failed to launch. But I'm not sure that that's actually coming from Rick Scott or his people.
Well, I did reach out last night to the guy who has always been my guy, to Rick Scott, and he said, "Stand by, nothing to tell you." I'm just putting it out there because it's a headline. That would make a baker's dozen, and that screws up the stage. Ben, do you think President Trump makes it to the primaries as a candidate?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, absolutely. I certainly think that we're going to have a situation here with the overwhelming story being the focus on Trump and everything related to his legal challenges and issues like that. But in terms of what we can expect, as the dominant narratives of this cycle, I think it's unavoidable that this is going to be the focus. And
So
just
my
given the
guy in Miami, who I will call Rusty Ricardo, you may know him, Ben, but I refer to him as Rusty Ricardo, tells me that that's a rocket docket. Judge Cannon wants it to go. She wants it done. She wants to get rid of the cloud over her name. I have Jay Weaver from the Miami Herald coming up this hour. Do you expect to see the president on trial in the fall?
No, I don't. I think that there's going to be a slowdown, and I think that rocket docket is not going to play out the way that people necessarily want it to. I know it has that reputation, and I know that I certainly think that there's an interest in moving with speed. But there's so many different factors here that I think lend itself to being slowed down in terms of the process as it plays out. And I think that there's more evidence that we have to anticipate is going to come out in additional filings that I think are going to be made. This is not just the end of the story. It's not just that they're going to go in with just what we know they already have. We already have the indication that there are perhaps multiple interviews that are going to be a factor here. And the back and forth over this, I think, is going to be something that just dominates the news cycle. Frankly, to the benefit of the focus being on the former president, and really preventing the ability of other candidates to talk about issues that are unrelated to him. I don't know if you saw the back and forth that Ron DeSantis had just the other day in North Augusta and South Carolina, with a number of different people asking him questions for a significant period of time all over the map. I mean, covering everything from infrastructure to nuclear power to marijuana decriminalization to transports, etc. And he showed quite the facility to handle all of those different things, and yet that's not the type of thing that's going to be covered today. It's going to be all about the legal woes, either of the former president or, frankly, the current president and his son.
Ben, has it occurred to you yet that we haven't had a presidential candidate or a president in a long time who is nimble? W, God love W, my favorite president of my lifetime. He wasn't nimble with the press. President Trump was a blunt force object in a meteor strike with the press. Joe Biden, God love him, the man is infirm and doesn't know what the press is talking about. So when you see Ron DeSantis stand up and nimbly address a dozen different things, it's really quite striking. But I think Nikki Haley can do it too. Do you think it's just that we're used to, 22 years of fumbling?
We've gotten used to a much lower standard of capability when it comes to the way that presidents deal with the press, in ways that I think are really sad for the nation. The ability of you to stand up and handle questions on a variety of subjects, at will, and not have to turn to a staffer and to know what's going on. It's there's always the suggestion that occurs when a Democrat is in office that comes from obviously leftist commentators that, oh, the job's just too big for one man or something like that. That it's just too heavy of a weight. And yet we've had people do this job over the years. So obviously it's a demanding job, but I do think that we've accepted a lower standard when it comes to people's capability to deal with complex issues and to handle them in a forthright manner with the American people and with the media that asks them questions.
And I purposely left out President Obama so that people would be driving around their cars who are Democrats saying, "What about President Obama? He was brilliant. He was smart." In fact, President Obama was awful with the media. He would take an hour and a half press conference and make it into 6 questions and would never answer the question, not Nimble, not what you're talking about with DeSantis or Nikki Haley or Tim Scott. He just went on monologues that had nothing to do with the substance. Do you remember it the way I do?
Oh, absolutely. And this is the other thing that people far too often they confuse different types of abilities with being able to handle the media and that type of thing. It's absolutely true that Barack Obama can give a speech at a distance from a crowd and inspire them, but that's a completely different set of skills than being able to stand up there and take rapid fire questions and handle them. And one of the things that I think is really a challenge in this moment for this field is you have so much of the oxygen in the room being taken up by these stories that really don't have a lot to do with Americans and their lives. There's so much concern out there in the country about all these issues, and it's not just confined to Republicans and conservatives. The direction of the country, the failure of our institutions, and frankly, the lack of confidence in the direction that we're headed is very palpable. You see it, not just in sort of the polls about the way people say that they feel, but you also see it in, frankly, the declining birth rate in America. You see it in the decline, among the kind of faith that people have in the type of future that they're bringing their children into. And that's something that I think is actually true regardless of ideology. It says something about the nature of the country. And I think that we want to get back to a point where we have leaders who can inspire us to believe that tomorrows are going to be better than yesterday. And instead, we are just stuck in this nostalgia loop, that we're going to go back and reverse course and, go back to some time that's non-existent time when everything was perfect. I'm
And
just
you
tired of
can't,
it, frankly. I think a lot of
yeah.
Americans are.
You can't get there until you have a president who will engage meaningfully with everybody in the country. Yesterday, President Obama sat down for an endless interview with Christiane Amanpour. Once again, a complete Bobo doll for the president. And I compare that with Brett Baier, who's a real journalist who did a superb job, as well a job of interviewing former President Trump as I've seen in an hour. What did you make of Brett? And that's, by the way, what I look for in a journalist. Fair, prepared, rapid fire question, not Barack Obama holding forth with Christiane Amanpour for 3-minute soliloquies.
Yeah, no, that Obama interview was insulting on so many different levels, but also because he has diminished so much since he left the office of the presidency. I think he's had such a terrible run, but you get the sense that they're going to go from that interview and go have lunch and drink white wine together, as opposed to Brett, where, the thing that is so powerful about Brett, and I say this as someone who, both works with him, obviously I'm biased, but one of the reasons he's the best in the business is that when he confronts people, he doesn't give them gotcha questions. He asks them a question, and then it leads naturally into the follow up. He asks the president, what we can expect that he would take from his prior time to apply it to the next White House, and then he follows it up by saying, "Well, but there are all these people who worked with you, who are now opposing you openly, or who you are insulting openly. You have these terrible relationships with all these people who you sold as being, hiring the best people. What's going to be different this time around?" And I felt like that was just a basic factual question. I've had it on my own mind about what kind of people are going to want to work in a cabinet, understanding that when they eventually leave, he's going to torch you one way or the other, and that's the kind of thing that I think is important to have in today's journalistic roster. And unfortunately, there's far too little of it.
And it wasn't argumentative, Ben. He didn't argue. He just asked. He listened and he asked good follow-ups.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. So many journalists, they get into that seat across from the former president, or even when he was president, and they just get locked into an argument with him. And instead, I think that Brett, especially when the president starts to repeat himself, when he sort of gets in one of those mantras, I think it's important to kind of shift him to the next topic, because otherwise,
Yeah, you got to throw a log on the track. That's what I call it. You got to put a track on the front of the train and make the train stop. Ben Domenech, B Domenech on Twitter, editor at large for The Spectator, and of course Fox News contributor extraordinaire. Thank you, Ben. Have a great weekend.